But the point is that these archetypes, once they start to exercise their pattern, they don't stop. Okay, they don't stop. They just, yeah, and at least this is their point. Now, Bill, you, huh?
Whose point?
Well, Edinger and Jung both said that throughout their writing. Okay, which is that once an archetype, archetypes are in the pleroma. They're not anywhere. We can't point to a place in the brain and any little chemistry going on in the brain that says that this is the mother archetype or whatever. You know, that isn't the way it works. But they're somewhere. Okay, they're in the DNA or something. I mean, there's something about us that makes all of us experience these archetypes. And so when they're called for, whatever they are, then they're going to play out. Okay, and they play all the way through. They don't stop. It's like a record that you cannot stop. Okay, so the point we were talking about last week, Bill, was the God-Image Archetype. Okay, now what both Jung and Edinger are saying is that this is the base level archetype of the human species, the God-Image. And and the interesting thing about this book, Answer to Job, now, is that what I finally got is that Jung is talking about the evolution of the human psyche. And what I hadn't noticed, I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but the story of Job was around for 1,000 years before the book of Job was written. Okay, so it was written down in 600 B.C., but Job actually lived historically, according to legend, between the time of Abraham and Noah's flood.
So it was oral tradition.
Pardon?
It came down through oral tradition.
It came down through oral tradition for 1,000 years. So we all probably have played the telephone game at a teenage party, right? And you can't keep a story straight among 20 people.
That happens just in my small family, trying to make plans.
Sure.
It's amazing how it gets translated just through a couple people.
Right. So the result is that, you know, poor Job, we have no idea what really happened to Job, you know. I mean, maybe all that stuff did or didn't. But what happened was, from an artistic point of view, from a creative point of view, these people who were moved to write started to write the story down, and that's what the book of Job ultimately is. And it may have been written by 3 or 4 people, they're not even sure. But the idea is that the fundamental idea that they're getting at through all of this book of Job thing is the emergence of the God-Image, okay, globally, okay, and it's unbelievable. I mean, I'm not going to read Buddhism to you tonight, but it's unbelievable how close the parallel is between what was happening with the writers of the book of Job and what was happening with the historical Gautama Buddha at the same period in history, okay, about, you know, in the 6th century B.C. And, you know, there are a couple of other places it was happening too, because it was, I mean, wasn't Aeschylus and all those Greek guys, a lot of the Greek guys were around that time too.
Aristotle was in the 400, and he was after Socrates, so I suspect, in Plato, so I suspect Socrates.
First of all, the basic theme of Answer to Job is the differentiation and transformation of the God image in history. the evolution of the psyche. And the basic idea is that Job's encounter with Yahweh is followed by an activation of the collective unconscious by virtue of Job's profound conscious insight into the nature of the deity. Okay. So Job had this profound insight that God had a good side and a bad side, right? And even though the bad side of God, the shadow side of God, was willing to make a bet with Satan, Job could go to the good side of God to plead his case. The final part of the basic idea, then, is the God image feels obliged to move closer to humankind, which is what you're saying. What he means by that is to get noticed by consciousness, which is the ego, right? And that's caused by something that happens in the deep unconscious that causes that.
Now, is that a trigger? Is it some kind of a psychic?
Well, they call it constellation, but it's some sort of trigger that calls for the God image to start to emerge, right? Before that, primitives had a very different attitude about God and God image. And remember what they were saying before about the new God image was that we all come through these stages. Okay, so first there's this animistic thing where everything is God. Matriarchy, the animistic, then matriarchy, then hierarchical polytheism, which is within the family. There's everybody's family has a polytheistic thing of a mother and a father, right? And they're God. And then the tribal monotheism, which is your community, right? And then universal monotheism, which is, your religion or your country or, your social structure. And then finally, the discovery of the psyche, which is individuation, where we have to go back to being individuals. And we tend to want to be communal. We have a herd instinct, like most creatures. I mean, I was seeing some amazing video the other day of swallows. You see 1,000 swallows and they're flying around and they're all flying within inches of one another and they change direction. It's unbelievable. And then you see the same thing in schools of fish and so on. And so we like to stick together in groups, right? But the trouble is the groups can get out of whack. Like Nazi Germany got pretty out of whack. Yeah, and the same thing happened in the Soviet Union, and so we need to. And in order for that to be stopped, it takes individuals to step up and say, "This ain't good." Okay, all right. So, but anyway, the point that Edinger and Jung are making is that the God image is the most basic archetype, the deepest layer. The basic objective of the psyche overall is to fulfill this constellated archetype. And so even if you're an atheist, you can call it there's no God, but the opposite of there's no God is there is a God, right? And no?
Well, okay, that's dualistic thinking, sure. If you're not doing that, then there.
Well, if you're not doing that, you're
an artist.
A snail. No, you're not an artist. Artists have psychic energy, but
It's a duality.
One thing though you were talking about. Remember I talked about the one fitting into the other,
right?
And you're talking about how this part changed over the millennium, So that means that interface changed between the two, which means the God image changed to accommodate each change.
Precisely. And so if we look at paragraph 617, there must be some dire necessity responsible for Yahweh to remember Sophia. Things simply couldn't go on as before, okay, because Sophia was in the pleroma, right? And the just God could not go on committing injustices, and the omniscient could not behave any longer like a clueless and thoughtless human being. Self-reflection becomes an imperative necessity, and for this wisdom is needed. Yahweh has to remember his absolute knowledge, for if Job gains knowledge of God, then God must also learn to know himself. It just could not be that Yahweh's dual nature should become public property and remain hidden from himself alone. Here's the quote I'm looking for. Whoever knows God has an effect on him. The failure of the attempt to corrupt Job has changed Yahweh's nature. Okay. So because Job has seen through God, basically seen through God's jazz, right? Because he has seen through God, God is going to have to change, and so that's what causes Sophia to be constellated again and remind Yahweh that, oh yeah, I have a feminine side too, right? And maybe there ought to be some righteousness in the process here. So I think of it as conscience, isn't it? Conscience. Human beings start to develop a conscience. I mean, before that, you look at, let's look at foxes over here at Annapolis Road. They don't have any conscience. I mean, they hunt, and if they can catch a bird or something, they'll eat it. They can't really catch a deer, but they don't have any qualms about that, right? Deer goes down, they're going to eat it right down. It's going to disappear. And so in nature, there are no qualms, but in humanity, at some point in our evolution, we started to have qualms, which is a conscience, right? That's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not a function it's generated by our social structure, by our need to be socially engaged with one another.
Right.
I think I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but isn't it? Well, I don't know about ants, but apes and monkeys, will have a conscience. They might.
Yeah, they have a rudimentary conscience, yeah. But they're not conscious of their conscience. That's the difference. Okay.
It's more like a reactionary rather than
Right. I mean, it's a behavior. It's a group behavior or whatever, right?
I can teach my cat to feel guilty if he does something.
Pardon?
I can teach my cat to feel guilty, like, that.
Right.
Full moon and a cat sometimes don't mix. And I say, look what you did. And he does feel guilt. He'll come and he stops up and he understands that he's done something wrong.
Right.
But he's still probably looking out for his instinct, which is he wants to eat tomorrow morning. So.
Right.
So that's it. It's almost like you're leading up to the thing. It's conscience is something that emerges like an archetype, and I don't think it does.
You don't think what?
I don't think it emerges because it's an archetype.
Do you think it's an evolution?
I think it's like a ritual. It's like a social construction. It's like a.
Well, I'm not saying it's an archetype. I'm saying that from the archetype, righteousness emerged about this time. Okay. Pardon?
Which archetype did it emerge?
Well, from the God-Image, went along for millions of years, presumably, and then Job came along and said, aha, Yahweh, I see you have two sides. right? And so, therefore, Yahweh had to change in terms of.
Softening? Is that where the softening
Yeah,
came?
I mean, there was a disturbance in the unconscious, right? And that disturbance also called up Sophia, right? Because there was a feminine side since the beginning also. And so all those things as Jung puts it later, there was a disturbance in the collective unconscious.
And that's how we move more from thought to more feeling. Because you said that the child sacrificing stopped, so that's just
right, and that was about the same time as Job, a little before, when Abraham stopped sacrificing. But mind you, Abraham stopped Jews sacrificing around 1700 BC, and they're still doing it in the Yucatan 2,000 years later. So, reading this, it does make me look at everybody I meet these days and wonder just how evolved. Yeah, how evolved are these people?
Don't look too deeply.
So these are class notes from Answer to Job, paragraphs 662 to 687, and they can be found in the Dropbox under handouts 100917, and you can download them and print them out yourself if you are admitted to the Dropbox, and if you want to, please do.